Hey, everybody. I'm in Tel Aviv, Israel, and I thought I would read a little section from In Trudeau's Kitchen. It's coming out in 13 days, which is actually 13 is good luck in Jewish. And I think it kind of cuts to the heart of why I held on to the story for so long, why I continue to suffer through the story for so long. And it helps me to understand why it is that we don't make much progress with respect to um, our relationship with malevolent power in our world, the plight of the whistleblower. But let me read this to you and see if you can relate to this. I have a feeling you will be able to relate to this in some part of your life. It's about the double bind. So, after my second attempt to disconnect from Sophie Trudeau and that world, there was a phone interception. I was going to pass some information to a friend of mine in Toronto just to hold on to. I was just not feeling comfortable, partly because of how Sophie had reacted after my first attempt to disconnect. I was sort of beginning to understand I had stepped into a world with different rules, which probably would be very obvious to you, but for some reason it wasn't so obvious to me. So after the second attempt to disconnect, she pushed me to stay connected. I reluctantly agreed to stay connected. Um, And then there was a phone event that occurred when I was arranging the time to pass this information to somebody to hold on to. And then I wanted to go public, but partly I didn't because I was still, I wasn't feeling hateful towards Sophie Trudeau. I just, I had been helping along a little bit with some writing and different things. And um, took me a long time to really understand what was going on, what that phone interception meant, what I had stepped into. And I couldn't seem to let go of the idea that I wanted to get help within the system itself. And, naive for sure. So much of the book is about what happened with each system that turns out to be quite corrupted and quite connected all to one another in their corruption. Let me read about the double bind. Um, the double bind continued to plague me. I would write things that I wanted to publish and then quickly back off. Too frightened to tell the story, yet too defiant to keep it all to myself. On a few occasions, I sat down and recorded elements of my story on Zoom. I found temporary comfort in the telling of the story, but there was no lasting comfort to be found, as I would only venture so far in the retelling before retracting due to my fear of consequences. This is why this went on for 5 years. The effect of the various events, combined with whatever personal and ancestral experience I'd had with authority, left me frightened about what these evildoers would do next. I continued to bounce back and forth between repression and expression, like dancing to a broken record. One persistent step forward, one persistent step backwards leaves you exactly where you were when you started. It's haphazard and chaotic, riddled with equal parts confusion and confidence. It's little wonder that people living inside of a double bind often get physically ill. The body is not built for this level of inner conflict and confusion. It's built to move in one direction or another, but not both at the same time. So, some very real part of the book is about trauma and my psychological process in relation to, for example, the double bind and how to shake loose of it. At some point along the way, I was worked on by a friend of mine who does cranial sacral work, and she was talking about the significance of the double bind. She'd been studying it, which often we can emanate from the culture you live in, where you're in a tyrannical environment where you can't say anything, and then inside you're holding all of this need to express and need to repress, are battling it out. And also just in terms of family life. In my family life, the way that I survived was, and not comfortably, was to keep expressing my discomfort with what was happening in the family environment, which couldn't shut up. And even though that made for a very difficult childhood in some ways, it also, in another way, preserved the integrity of my being, right? Because I was being true to my voice with respect to systemic abuse of power, essentially, in the family environment. Um, and then eventually I got worn down by the time I was sort of like a teenager, and I stopped expressing myself. And when that started to happen, everything fell apart. Stopped going to school. I failed more courses than I passed. It was a miracle. I found my energy because I had a relationship when I was 18, and that love opened my heart again and energized me again. And I was able to become a good student again and found my way into university, and I did well there. But the double bind really plagued me for probably somewhere around 6 to 8 years. And then as I moved into the world, and eventually in the last number of years before this Trudeau thing, I sort of found my callings. And my callings were, there was no double bind. It was just like, okay, stay alive, find a way to stay alive financially, and then find time to create. And so it was clear. And then this happened. And sort of my ancestral and sort of archaic memory, my embodied memory of what happens when you piss off somebody with power. They shouldn't have power. If it's a democracy, it should just be service. But that's not what it is yet, or that's not what it is with them. And it was obvious to me, even at one point she sort of, wrote me and said, I'm safe. She's there for me. This kind of words like that. And it was sort of like impliedly, the message impliedly, or at least the way in which I interpreted was, I've got you, but don't go too far, because then who knows what's going to happen. And that's what happened. I kept going. And then I don't think anybody could control the tempestuous and reactive nature of the salty and malevolent dragons that took over the situation. But I understand now this state of double bindness. So I'm inviting you, I guess, to consider in very subtle and much larger ways, ways in which you are locked inside of a double bind, particularly with respect to a memory or experience of abuse of power in the system, parental system, political system, schooling system, all of those things, And one of my concerns with a lot of the somatic psychotherapy work that's being done now is that it's almost too soft to resolve this problem. I know when I did bioenergetics and I could really pick up a bat or get down to the ground and kick my feet at a foam cube, really get in touch with those core memories. What I was doing was thawing out the double bind, allowing myself, granting myself permission to fully express myself. And I think that transformed and energized me and allowed me to regain a feeling of integrity of being. Yes. And so that's so much what the story is about, is what had to happen over this 5-year period for me to reach the place where I could not only write the book, so that was one step, but actually make efforts to publish the book. Speaking of publishing the book is coming out on December 9th. If you go on Amazon, for example, you're going to see something a little bit chaotic. And I don't want to tell the whole story really ever about what's gone on with this book deal. I will if I have to. I have it all prepared and documented. But the one thing I can tell you is that chaos that you see there, some part of it is probably not an accident. First of all, the paperback, it is the correct cover, but the subtitle has changed. I have asked a number of times to have that cover changed to reflect the new subtitle, and for the book description to be changed to what we now have as the book description on the back of the book cover. This has not happened yet. But if you order the book there or anywhere, you will get the right book. You may also see, for example, on Amazon, 2 audiobooks. One with the new subtitle, which just came up, I think, this week or the week before. Came up very quickly. And then the other one, which reflected a deal that I had with a very well-reputed audiobook company through the literary agency that I was affixed to for many years. Things happened. with the agent. And eventually what happened is I signed a different deal than the deal that was in the works. Um, and the new subtitle is reflected on that cover. By rights, the old cover should be gone, so there's no confusion for purchasers. This creates a kind of confusion for people, and they don't know which book they're buying. And because the paperback is not showing the new updated subtitle, and so the previous subtitle had Sophie Trudeau's name in it, which I just didn't really feel was necessary, because she's part of the story, the early part of the story, of course, but most of the story is about a much bigger level of abuse of power than just whatever was going on within our dynamic. So then I suggested a change to the subtitle that is now the current subtitle of the book, In Trudeau's Kitchen, My Unexpected Journey with Power, Politics, and the Global Elite. So if you're pre-ordering the audiobook, that's the one you want to purchase. If you're ordering the paperback, just order what's there, because you're still going to get the one with the correct subtitle. Does this make sense? It has been incredibly complicated. I sort of thought, like, you sign a deal, like I signed a deal for my first book, and then of course put all my own work out through Enrealment, and it was just like you do it and then you organize it and it happens. And this has not been that. This has been very similar in a great many ways to this 5-year long journey, where nothing happens naturally, nothing happens simply. Let's just say on a universal level for the moment, there are various energetic hindrances, obstructions, challenges, and tests before you actually get to actualize your simple intention, which is to tell the world what happened to you. So as you can imagine, my double bind has come back to life. Tell the story, don't tell the story. In any event, that's where I'm at with that. So if this interests you, this topic, I think it's really something. And, I think because I've been inside of the double bind container and the crucible for so long, it's been difficult to really begin to understand that that's what happened to me, right? Like you're like a fish in the ocean. You don't know anything but the ocean. But I'm shifting, I'm changing, despite the efforts still being made by the powers that be to prevent me from having my voice, I am thawing out. And one thing I really get is, 5 years gave them a lot of time to dredge up a lot of compromise or so-called compromise, and to defame me and turn people against me and isolate me. It gives them a lot of time. The other side of it is it makes for a much better story, because so much more has happened in the last couple of years, because it just wouldn't stop. But I get that one of the ways malevolent power perpetuates itself and stays alive is that even if even if I tell my story and I reach as many people, and there's no blockages to the books and no hindrances and no games, it's all gone. Everything just goes where it's supposed to go. They will absolutely do more damage to me, whether it's reputationally or in some other form, than whatever damage the story will do to them. That's why this game keeps going on, because they're experts. Even if they can't drive you mad, which they've tried to do, even if they can't kill you, which they have tried to do, they will do something to make sure that you look worse than them. They'll pay people, they'll conjure things up. That's what they do. They've been doing this, particularly on the left, forever and ever. I'm aware of that, and I'm prepared for that, and I know that's inevitably something's going to happen. Because the key for them is, if they accept, and they have to accept it now, that my story is going to be told one way or the other, it'll be told. What they then do when they go into their battleship position is go, okay, unfortunately, we couldn't stop him, but let's destroy him in another way. So my hope is, even if they do that, that you allow yourself to really, if you read this book or hear this book, really allow yourself to settle into the significance of what this book is sharing about the way in which our democracies are now being completely and utterly manipulated, and primarily because technology has created an opportunity and an opening, all kinds of portals of possibility for power brokers, people who long for power, people with depleted egos who desperately need to be the man, to manipulate and control human consciousness. And I say at the very end of the book, whistleblowers, in the US, they have a number of programs in place for governmental whistleblowers to be rewarded, or at least to be able to survive economically after the whistleblowing, which I think is wonderful. But I fundamentally believe, I have seen this, and this book captures this, that if we don't get legislation in place in every democracy, like forget the perfection projection nonsense that people are perfect and you don't need this. Forget about it. It's nonsense. It's a fantasy. We have to get whistleblower legislation in place in every aspect of society, corporate environments, family environments, academic environments, for sure, so that this part of some humans, part of all of us, but some of us outgrow it and some don't, who really, really is malevolent with respect to power, really needs power over, whether it's because it makes them feel safe, whether it's because it's a chance for them to move their unresolved anger, whether, or not, it's opportunity for them and their little funny predilections to get protected, which is, it turns out, a very common reason for people wanting power, particularly in the political world. This has to end. We ask ourselves often, why are things not improving? And my belief is, basically, if I could limit it to one particular thing, it really is that abusers of political and corporate and academic power and religious power and spiritual power, all the rest of it, are not being contained. If you contain them, then all that grassroots energy, all of that stuff that's thawing out and ridding itself of the double bind that's been holding back human consciousness, goes away. And we just grow together. And we grow together. And this book is an invitation for us to grow together. So I hope you pick it up. I hope you encourage others to pick it up. And I'll be back soon to do another reading. Thanks for listening.